The dog's cry led a man to a dying baby. Little did he know his life would change. The fog that clung to Louisiana after the storm was heavier than rain, rolling across the streets like a living thing. FEMA trailers stood in rows, pale boxes against a bruised sky, their thin aluminum walls echoing with the sounds of people rebuilding lives out of rubble. Inside one of them, Nathan Cole sat at his kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. Once, Nathan had been a combat medic in the Army. Later, a veterinarian with a thriving clinic and a family that filled every room with light. But Katrina had swept away the city, and a year before that, a highway accident had stolen his wife and daughter. Now, he existed in the hollow between storms, haunted, numb, surviving out of obligation rather than hope. A knock startled him. No, not a knock. A deliberate thud, followed by a sharp scrape at the door. He rose wary, and when he opened it, the fog parted to reveal a shape on his porch. A German shepherd, female, her coat slick with rain, stood firm despite the tremor in her body. In her jaws, she held the scruff of a tiny pup, limp and bloodied. The mother lowered the pup gently onto the step, then lifted her head. Her amber eyes met Nathan's with a clarity that pierced him to his core. She tapped her paw against the door once, twice, as if demanding entry, demanding help. Not for herself, for the little one. Nathan dropped to his knees, his training flooding back. He lifted the pup, felt the faint flutter of a heartbeat. His throat tightened. "Hang on, little one," he murmured. He looked at the mother. "I'll do what I can." The shepherd exhaled sharply, almost like a sigh of relief, then pressed her wet head against his chest as if sealing the pact. Nathan carried both inside, unaware that in opening his door, he had also opened something long buried in himself. He would name the mother Grace, the pup Hope, and nothing about his life or the town around him would ever be the same. The storm had stripped Louisiana bare. Roofs lay caved in like broken rib cages. Boats sat stranded in front yards, and families drifted from shelter to shelter, clutching memories in plastic bags. Nathan Cole's trailer stood on the edge of the FEMA park, surrounded by a scattering of half-dead trees that bent under the weight of the Gulf winds. Nathan was 42, tall but gaunt, his once powerful frame thinned by grief and neglect. His face bore the weathering of two lives. One lived in the chaos of combat zones, patching wounded soldiers beneath the thunder of mortars, and another in the quiet tenderness of a veterinary clinic where he'd once healed farm dogs and house cats with equal devotion. That second life had ended on a highway curve when a truck skidded across the center line. His wife, Sarah, and his daughter, Lily, were gone in an instant. Katrina came the following year, drowning what remained of his practice, leaving him in this temporary box of metal walls. He moved through his days mechanically, feeding strays when he found them, checking on neighbors when storms threatened, but otherwise retreating into the hollow of his own silence. He spoke little, smiled never, and when people tried to thank him for the help he gave, he brushed them off. The German shepherd changed that. She was strong despite the hollowness of her flanks, her coat dark with sable streaks that caught what little sunlight broke through the fog. Her eyes were what arrested him most, clear, unwavering, intelligent. The pup she carried was a slip of a thing, its ribs visible, its breath shallow. Nathan worked through the night, his hands steady as they had been in war. He stitched, cleaned, and wrapped. by dawn, the pup slept with a faint but steady rhythm, nestled in a basket near the stove. Nathan named the mother Grace. It suited her, the way she bore herself with a quiet nobility. The pup he called Hope, because in saving it, something in him had flickered alive for the first time in years. As he brushed Grace's coat dry with an old towel, Nathan noticed the faint imprint of a collar once worn, the skin beneath it rubbed raw. Later, when Grace finally allowed him close enough, he found the worn leather tucked under a patch of fur, a tag, battered but legible, an inscription, K99 Unit, NOPD. Nathan's breath caught. Grace had been no stray. She was trained, a working dog, perhaps once a hero in her own right. Questions flooded him. How had she survived the storm? Where was her handler? Why had she come here, to him, out of all places? The answer came in pieces. In the days that followed, Grace stayed close, shadowing his every step, guarding Hope's basket like a soldier at post. Neighbors noticed. Eleanor McKay, a 70-year-old widow who lived 2 trailers down, stopped by with soup and curiosity. Miguel, a wiry 15-year-old whose family had lost everything, offered to help with chores in exchange for time with the pup. Slowly, a circle formed around Nathan, one he hadn't asked for but couldn't quite refuse. Grace revealed herself in flashes, the way she sat alert at doors, the way she flinched at sirens but never fled, the way her ears pricked at the cries of children in distress. Nathan began to suspect that she had carried more than a wounded pup to his door. She had carried purpose back into his life. One evening, after settling Hope into her basket, Nathan crouched beside Grace. "You were trained to protect, weren't you?" he murmured. Grace lifted her head, eyes catching the lantern light, and in them he saw something uncanny. Recognition. Agreement. For the first time since Sarah and Lily's deaths, Nathan felt the corners of his mouth lift into the ghost of a smile. The hollow inside him wasn't gone, but Grace and Hope had carved a light through it. And in that fragile light, Nathan began to wonder if the life he thought was over had only just begun again. Morning broke pale and wet, mist rolling low across the FEMA camp. Nathan woke to the sound of claws tapping softly on the linoleum floor. Grace padded into the kitchenette, muzzle nudging against his arm where he sat slumped at the table. She didn't bark or whine. She simply fixed him with that steady gaze, then glanced toward the basket where Hope stirred fitfully. Nathan followed, kneeling beside the pup. Its small body shivered as though the chill of the storm still lived in its bones. He wrapped it in a threadbare towel and felt the frail heartbeat beneath his fingers. Grace leaned closer, her breath warm against his hand, her flank pressed firm against his shoulder. It was more than instinct, it was insistence. She was telling him without words, do not give up on her. That morning became the first of many. Nathan found himself moving not just out of duty, but with something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He boiled rice and chicken scraps, coaxing tiny spoonfuls into Hope's mouth. He stitched together a makeshift pen from old crates so the pup could stretch when strength returned. Grace hovered nearby, eyes never leaving either Nathan or her pup. The bond grew in small, ordinary moments. When Nathan's hand shook with fatigue, Grace pressed her head into his lap, steadying him. When nightmares gripped him at night, the echoes of sirens and gunfire, he would wake to find Grace lying by his bed, her amber eyes glowing in the dark, grounding him. Miguel began stopping by after school, drawn by curiosity about the pup. Grace accepted him cautiously at first, then softened when she saw how gently the boy cradled Hope. Nathan watched them together, an old soldier, a wounded dog, a grieving teenager, and something inside him shifted. The silence of the trailer no longer felt like a tomb. It was beginning to hum with fragile life. It wasn't just Grace watching over Hope. She was watching Nathan too. One evening, as he changed the pup's bandages, Nathan whispered almost to himself, "Why me? Out of all the doors, why mine?" Grace, lying close, lifted her head and placed her paw gently against his knee. The gesture stunned him. It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. A soldier recognizing another. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He remembered carrying bloodied men through dust and fire, the desperate grip of comrades who trusted him with their last breaths. That same trust shone in Grace's eyes now. For the first time since Sarah and Lily's deaths, he wasn't drowning in the memory of what he had lost. He was being pulled toward what he might save. By the end of the week, Hope was strong enough to totter across the trailer floor, tiny legs shaking, tail wagging clumsily. Nathan laughed, a rusty sound, startling in his own ears. Grace's ears pricked at the sound, and she let out a soft whine, leaning into his side as if to say, "There it is. That's who you are." The connection between them was no longer just need. It was recognition. Grace had brought him a life to save, but in doing so, she had given him back his own. The FEMA trailer park quieted at night, though quiet in Louisiana after Katrina never truly meant peace. The hum of generators filled the gaps where electricity had not yet returned, and the smell of mildew and damp wood lingered as if the storm had seeped into the marrow of the land itself. Nathan would sit on the porch of his trailer long after Miguel and Eleanor had gone home, a mug of cooling coffee in his hand, Grace lying at his feet. Hope slept inside, curled in a blanket-lined basket, her tiny chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. It was in these late hours that the weight of memory pressed hardest. Nathan rarely spoke of his past, but Grace's steady presence teased it out in fragments. The combat medic who had stitched together broken soldiers under mortar fire, the veterinarian who had once run a bustling clinic with his wife Sarah by his side, the father who had sung his little girl Lily to sleep with lullabies about the bayou. All of it had been carved away, first by the accident on that rain-slick highway, then by the hurricane that had drowned the city he loved. He could still see the twisted wreckage of the car, Sarah's hand reaching for him in those final moments. He could still hear Lily's voice in the back seat, asking if they were almost home. And afterward, the silence, a silence that stretched into years, punctuated only by the screams he stitched up in his dreams. Grace had her own ghosts. Nathan saw them in the way she startled at distant sirens, the way she bristled at uniforms that passed through the camp, the way her eyes hardened whenever thunder cracked. When he found the faded leather collar buried under her fur with its stamped words, K9 Unit, NOPD, the pieces began to fall into place. This was no ordinary survivor. She had been trained, disciplined, loyal to someone once, someone who had not returned for her. One evening, while Hope nuzzled clumsily at a bowl of softened kibble, Nathan studied Grace. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" he said quietly. She met his gaze, unblinking. In that look, he saw the same fracture he carried, the unbearable knowledge of survival when others had fallen. It was Linda Vega who gave the memory flesh. She came to the trailer park, after hearing whispers of a shepherd answering to the name Grace, a silver-haired woman with tired eyes. She carried a folded photograph. Her son Mark, an officer with the New Orleans Police Department, his arm around a younger Grace. She belonged to him, Linda said softly, her voice trembling. They worked together until he didn't come home. Mark had been killed during the chaos after 9/11 deployments, swept into the confusion of a national tragedy, while his partner dog had been listed as lost. For years, Linda had believed Grace dead. Seeing her now, standing protectively over Hope, tears coursed down her face. Nathan watched as Grace approached the woman, nose working the air, then pressing her head gently into Linda's palm. It was a reunion built from grief rather than joy, two survivors bound by the same absence. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He sat with Grace on the porch, the photo of Mark Vega resting in his hands. "You shouldn't be here any more than I should," he murmured. "But here we are." Grace leaned against his leg, and Nathan let his eyes close, for once not fighting the tears. The tragedies they carried, his lost family, her fallen partner, were mirrors. They reflected back the same hollow loneliness, the same scars carved by fate's cruelty. But in that reflection, Nathan felt something new. Not the crushing weight of loss, but the fragile recognition that maybe, just maybe, they weren't meant to carry it alone anymore. Hope's soft whimper from inside pulled him back to the present. Nathan rose, brushing Grace's head. "We've both lost everything," he said, his voice steadier now. "But maybe this little one, maybe she's a sign we don't have to stay lost." Grace followed him in, her tail brushing his leg. As Nathan bent to check the pup's breathing, he realized the truth. His ghosts would never leave him, but they no longer ruled him. Grace had given him more than another mouth to feed. She had given him back the will to keep trying. Still, beneath this fragile peace, danger lurked. He didn't know it yet, but the people who once claimed ownership over dogs like Grace had not forgotten her. And soon enough, their shadows would come knocking. The first sign of trouble came not from a storm, but from a woman in a pressed suit with cold eyes. It was a muggy afternoon when Evelyn Stroud arrived at the trailer park, her polished shoes sinking slightly into the mud that still hadn't dried since the last rain. She carried a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the Liberation Animal Foundation. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind used to soothe donors and unsettle opponents. "I'm here for the dogs," she announced to Nathan, her gaze flicking from Grace to the tiny Hope tumbling in the grass nearby. "We have a court order to transfer them into our custody. You'll understand. It's for their own good. Retired canines suffer greatly in private care. We believe in ending that suffering humanely." Nathan's blood went cold. He read the papers, scanning the signatures, the clumsy formatting. Something didn't smell right. Years as a medic had taught him to spot forged details on casualty reports. These papers had the same stench. "You're not taking them," Nathan said, his voice low, firm. Grace stood at his side, her body taut, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Evelyn's smile tightened. "You're traumatized, Mr. Cole. Everyone knows your history. Are you really in any state to care for these animals? Step aside before this becomes unpleasant." Nathan didn't. Instead, he called David Rohr, a former JAG lawyer who had once served with him overseas. Within hours, David was standing in the trailer, dissecting the so-called court order with professional disdain. "This is counterfeit," he declared. "File a motion to the parish clerk and it'll collapse in seconds." Word spread quickly through the camp. Eleanor McKay, Miguel, and half a dozen neighbors showed up, forming a protective circle around Grace and Hope. Evelyn, realizing the tide had turned, retreated with promises that this wasn't over. It wasn't. That night, Nathan couldn't shake the woman's words. Why would anyone go to such lengths to seize Grace? He sat with David, Eleanor, and Miguel around the small table while Grace dozed at his feet and Hope snored softly in a basket. David's tone was grave. "Stroud isn't just some animal rights eccentric. I've heard whispers. She's been targeting retired canines for years. Claims she's rescuing them, but more often than not, they disappear. Budgets, euthanasia orders, all under the guise of compassion." The revelation hit Nathan like a hammer. He looked at Grace, at the scars she bore, at the way she pressed against him when thunder cracked. "She's already survived losing one partner," he said quietly. "I won't let her be taken again." The days that followed were tense. Nathan noticed cars idling too long near the FEMA park. Grace growled at shadows that lingered at the perimeter. One evening, Miguel ran breathless to the trailer. "Someone tried to grab Hope when I was walking her by the levee. Grace chased them off." Nathan's resolve hardened. He began to prepare the trailer not just as a shelter, but as a sanctuary worth defending. He reinforced doors with scrap lumber, strung lights around the lot, and kept his rifle cleaned and close. Eleanor baked casseroles for the volunteers who began drifting in to help, their solidarity a silent stand against the threat pressing in. Grace seemed to understand. She patrolled the perimeter tirelessly, her body lean but powerful, her eyes scanning every shadow. She had become more than a survivor. She was a guardian again, and Nathan realized how deeply he had come to trust her instincts. The conflict came to a head when Evelyn herself returned, this time flanked by two men in dark uniforms. Grace bristled, her growl rumbling like thunder. Hope yelped and scurried under the table. Nathan stepped forward, his voice steady. "You'll need more than forged papers to take them now. You'll need to go through all of us." Behind him, Eleanor appeared with Miguel, David, and half the camp, a wall of ordinary people standing firm. Evelyn's mask cracked then, her eyes flashing not pity, but rage. "You don't know what you're protecting," she hissed. "You think these animals are heroes? They're relics, broken tools, and I will not stop until every last one is released from their suffering." She left in a storm of fury, but her words lingered like smoke. Grace pressed her head against Nathan's hand, steady and warm. He looked down into her amber eyes and whispered, "They'll come again, but this time we'll be ready." What Nathan didn't yet know was that Evelyn's crusade was rooted in her own wound, a wound tied to Grace's past and to a ghost thought long buried. The confrontation at the trailer park had rattled Nathan, but what came after nearly broke him. Late one evening, Evelyn returned, not with forged papers this time, but with confession. She stood on Nathan's porch, her expression stripped of arrogance, her hands trembling as though they carried more than a folder of documents. Grace stood stiff at Nathan's side, teeth bared, but something in Evelyn's eyes stopped him from sending her away immediately. "I've done terrible things," she began, her voice low, almost pleading. "I thought I was saving them. The retired K9s, the ones no one had use for anymore. My son." Her throat tightened. "He was a handler. He and his partner Rex were killed in the towers on 9/11. That's what they told me. For years, I couldn't stand the thought of other dogs dying the way he did, in cages, forgotten. So I took them. I thought I was rescuing them, but I wasn't. I ordered them put down. Hundreds of them. I told myself it was mercy. The words hit Nathan like shrapnel. Miguel, standing in the doorway, gasped audibly. Eleanor, who had come to bring a casserole, clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Evelyn's face crumpled. Then I saw the footage, the video of Grace pulling that family out of the fire during Katrina, and then I saw him, Rex, the scar on his side. I know it was him. He survived, Nathan. He survived, and I... Her voice broke entirely. Grace, as if hearing the name, lifted her head sharply. Her ears pricked, her body quivered. A low whine escaped her throat, not of fear, but of recognition. Evelyn dropped the folder onto Nathan's table. Inside were files, records of every dog she had taken, orders she had signed, the blood of her guilt laid bare in black ink. "I'm ready to face what I've done," she whispered. "But if there's a chance Rex is alive, I need to know. I need to make it right." The room was heavy with silence. Nathan felt the weight of his own ghosts pressing in, the endless loop of his wife and daughter's accident, the helplessness of survival. He looked at Grace, her amber eyes locked on his, and saw not condemnation, but choice. She had been abandoned, betrayed, written off as lost, and yet she had carried hope to his door, asking for trust. Nathan swallowed hard. "If Rex is alive, we'll find him. But understand this, grace and hope are not yours to take, not now, not ever." Evelyn nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe I can help build something better." The following days blurred into preparation. With David Rohr's help, Evelyn arranged to testify publicly about the euthanasia program she had run under the guise of rescue. It would ruin her reputation, possibly her freedom, but she didn't flinch. "It's the least I can do," she said. For Nathan, the emotional climax came not in Evelyn's confession, but in the decision it forced, whether to trust again. He had built his life on isolation after tragedy, believing love only led to loss. Yet here was Grace, who had lost her partner and still chose loyalty. Here was Evelyn, broken by her own sins but still searching for redemption. And here was Hope, the fragile pup who had no past, only a future, waiting for someone to believe in it. One night, as storms rumbled distantly over the bayou, Nathan sat on the porch with Grace pressed against his leg, Hope curled between his boots. Miguel sat nearby, sketching the outlines of a sanctuary they dreamed of building. Eleanor hummed softly inside. For the first time in years, Nathan didn't feel like a survivor living on borrowed time. He felt like part of something worth saving. Grace lifted her head and barked once into the night. Nathan followed her gaze toward the horizon, where tomorrow's road awaited. Somewhere out there, Rex might still be alive. Somewhere out there, a final thread of loyalty waited to be pulled back into the light. Nathan rested his hand on Grace's scarred neck. "We'll find him," he whispered, "and when we do, none of you will ever be left behind again." Grace leaned into him, her eyes shining in the dark, and Nathan felt it, the quiet but unshakable truth that loyalty, once given, could heal even the deepest wounds. 3 weeks later, the FEMA park was no longer just rows of weary trailers. It had become the beating heart of a new beginning. Where once tarps flapped in the wind, neighbors now worked shoulder to shoulder, raising pens, painting signs, and clearing a patch of land Nathan had christened Bayou Haven Sanctuary. The sanctuary began with grace and hope, but quickly grew. Injured strays, abandoned pets, and even farm animals left adrift after the storm found their way there. Miguel hauled lumber with the determination of someone twice his age, his laughter louder now, no longer weighted with loss. Eleanor organized supplies with the efficiency of a general, her shawl forever dusted in flour from the casseroles she baked for volunteers. Grace thrived in her new role. Her amber eyes no longer scanned for threats, but for lives to protect. She greeted every newcomer with a steady confidence that seemed to tell them, "You are safe now." Hope bounded at her side, stronger with each sunrise, a living emblem of second chances. Then came the reunion that sealed it all. Nathan and Miguel drove to Houston following a lead, Grace restless in the back seat as if she already knew where the road would end. At a flood relief camp, they found him, an older German shepherd, scar cut deep across his flank, eyes weary but still burning. Rex, the dog the world had mourned since 2001. When Grace saw him, she froze. Then, with a sound that was neither bark nor whine, but something ancient and raw, she ran. Rex's ears flicked, his body stiffened, then melted into hers. The two dogs pressed against each other, scar to scar, survivor to survivor. Nathan felt tears sting his eyes. Even Miguel went silent, awed. Back at Bayou Haven, Evelyn Stroud was waiting. She had honored her promise, standing in court, confessing her deeds, exposing the cruelty she once oversaw. Her reputation was ruined, but her purpose reborn. When she saw Rex alive, her knees gave way. The reunion between her and the dog she thought lost forever was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, the sanctuary blossomed. Local veterans visited, finding comfort in the steady presence of the dogs. Carl, a soldier haunted by losing his own canine partner overseas, broke down in Grace's fur one morning, then rose with steadier hands. Children who had lost homes in the hurricane laughed again, chasing hope through the fields. And Nathan, once hollowed by grief, felt life return. He had not erased his losses. Sarah and Lily's absence still carved his days. But Grace, Hope, Rex, Miguel, Eleanor, Evelyn, and all the others had woven themselves into his brokenness until it resembled something whole again. One dawn, Nathan stood on the old wooden bridge near the bayou, Grace at his side, Hope darting around their feet, Rex watching with the solemn dignity of age. The first light broke across the water, golden and soft. Nathan whispered into the morning, "No one will be left behind any more." Grace leaned against him. Hope barked once, sharp and joyful. Rex lifted his head, eyes on the horizon, and Nathan knew the promise was not just for them, but for every life they would touch. The dogs, the people, the community rising from ruin. Because the truest victories are not in what we win, but in what we refuse to lose. Loyalty, love, and the lives we choose to stand beside.